ReCore is a game that reminds me of the old PlayStation 2 games where there was an open world where sort of that acted more as a hub than anything else, and it led you to levels or dungeons. And ReCore stars Jewel, and she uses these companions, which is essentially cores in animal frameworks, and that as well as the platforming, which is surprisingly great, and the combat, which is fast, snappy and fluid, makes a great core foundation. Except the only thing that really lets it down is the actual design of the game itself. So the first half of the game, you could easily feel like this could be one of the best games of the year. I mean, getting around is fun, the platforming is surprisingly well implemented and feels great. Like, there are dungeons or optional dungeons that are seen as like traversal dungeons, and getting through them feels fun. They're tough to get every single secondary objective complete, even past your first try, but you can never feel like you're blaming the platforming because everything feels precise and satisfying. And the same can be said for the combat. You have a gun as your main weapon, and it has 4 color coded like types of bullets, and these are best against enemies with the same colored cores. And just switching between them colors during any sort of battle scene where you're going against multiple ones is really fun. It adds an extra layer without making it too complex or too frustrating to sort of get past, because the game is very fast and snappy, and if you don't keep up with the pace you will be killed rather easily. And there are moments where the actual difficulty does spike, but it doesn't sort of keep you from playing on. The one thing that kind of stops you from playing is when you get about halfway through the game, throughout the game you collect things called prismatic cores, and these are used as sort of a requirement to get further on into other dungeons. You also level up, and that does hold you back from other dungeons, but not as much as the prismatic cores, because no matter what you do, you level up in the game, but you don't always get prismatic cores. There are a few per dungeon. You get usually one for just completing the dungeon and then optional things, and then there's a fair number of them spread throughout the world, but you're never given any indication really that you need to collect them. So you'll get to this point then when you sort of come up against a wall where you will hit the level requirement, but you may be short like 5-6 prismatic cores, and then you've got to do a lot of backtracking to go through the optional dungeons, which then in a way doesn't really make it an optional dungeon at all, because you need it to complete the later stages of the game. And it's unfortunate because it's something that could be tweaked. I mean, it's something that could be released in a patch later on where you remove that requirement, or just sort of hint at you earlier on in the game saying that this will be something you need to collect later on, because it just kind of killed the flow of the game for me. Like, I was turning around and I felt like I was taking notes. I have a notebook here saying that this could be one of the best games of the year, and then sort of as the notes went on, they kind of were like, oh, but they've got this, and oh, it's unfortunate. And later on especially, I started to notice a number of bugs. Like, the game like warrants exploration. There's sort of resources you find throughout the world, and you can see them up on cliff sides here and there, and they're not really clearly indicated whether they can be climbed or not, but this kind of gives you the indication that they can. The only thing is it feels like certain parts of the world are expected, you are expected to climb on and over, and then others aren't. Like, there's one of the frames you get later on allows you to sort of glide across the sky, like allows you to glide when you jump, and I've gotten to areas that clearly I wasn't supposed to reach, because either I'd be stuck standing on an invisible ground, or I'd fall, or I'd get stuck. And it's just those little things. Like, think about it, the only bad things I can say about this game is stuff that could be fixed pretty easily, but at the same time they hinder the overall experience so much for me that I can't just let it slide and say, oh look, don't worry, give it a few weeks, it'll be fixed, simply because I don't know when it or if it'd be fixed. And they kill a lot of momentum for me, because it's not a full price game, and it looks like that and it feels like that, but there's so much to love about it, so much charm, there's personality in the cores. They don't say anything, they're not really part of the story really, but just the way they move, the way they interact and all that, they're all pretty distinct, and yeah, like I said, they have personalities. And this is the first game to go on the Xbox Play Anywhere, so if you get it on Xbox One, you also have on PC and vice versa. And this works actually really well. Like, redeemed the code on Xbox, had it there on PC as well. And if you have both and are able to play both, I would definitely recommend the PC version. I was able to get it running on 1080p, 60 frames a second, no problem on an R9 390X, which, I mean, it is overkill for it, but it ran really smoothly, ran really well, and was really enjoyable. Like, texture work is better. Like, the game isn't a great looking game. It's fine, don't get me wrong. It doesn't look like a last gen game by any means, but especially on the Xbox One, textures can look quite muddy, and like, they're not as detailed as they should be, probably, given the system that it's on. But PC, it looks brilliant and it runs really well, and it enhances the combat even more, having double the frames. On the Xbox One, there were moments where I could feel the frame rate get a little choppier, not drastically, but it was still noticeable, where on PC I barely ever felt it. I barely ever felt any sort of drop or stutter, and it was just a much more enjoyable experience. So in conclusion, ReCore is actually, I really, really like the game. Still, after everything, I think it's a really, really good game. It's just held back by an inherent, at its core, pun intended, bad design choice. A bad structure to progression that kind of hinders the whole experience of the game in the latter half. And if it wasn't for that, and its myriad of little bugs and problems, it would probably be, it still is, one of the best third-person games to come out this year. I just wish these little things were ironed out beforehand, because then I'd be telling you it is one of the best games easily of the year.